The lower end of the GPU market hasn't had anything for quite some time, which is odd considering the majority of the market game at 1080p. Well, today, that's all about to change. Let's do this.
Yo dog, I heard you like RGB, so I put RGB on your RGB.
Thanks dog, but this is my show. Go back to Pimp My Ride. The new NZXT Kraken X63 RGB now with two 140mm RGB fans with an even larger infinity mirror display and new 7th gen eTeknix pump. And with a 6-year warranty, you've got nothing to worry about. Get your RGB on. Link in the description to find out more. Isn't that right?
So before I get started with anything, this card, among other AIB RX 6600 cards, are launching right now for $329 USD, or $299.99 in the UK. Though with anything at the moment, that doesn't mean you'll necessarily get your hands on it at that price. If you do, however, I'd say even before watching the rest of this video, go and buy it. With the closest model RTX 3060 going for well above £550 right now, depending on the price you can actually get the 6600 for, you may be able to get, I don't know, an early adopter deal, which, much like we saw on the 6600 XT when that launched, it is possible before the pricing went up. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So when the 6600 XT launched, it sat comfortably between the RTX 3060 and 3060 Ti, both in terms of price and performance. We actually saw it outperforming the Ti in some of the newer titles that are geared more towards AMD's RDNA 2 architecture. So I hear you all asking, what is the point in the 6600 non-XT? Well, what if you could get performance better than a 3060 for a lot less money? That's what it's all about. Especially now that AMD are starting to compete with those features that we've seen NVIDIA cards sport for quite some time, including ray tracing and AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution, or for those who don't know, their own version of DLSS. The other point, as I said at the start, is that 1080p is still the big player in terms of favoured resolution, at least according to the Steam hardware survey, with 67.53%, with the next closest resolution actually being 2560 by 1440 at a measly 8.94%. I mean, that's quite a big difference, which shows that 1080p is still where it's at. And that's exactly where the 6600 comes in. Sure, you could argue that the 6600 XT is a 1080p monster that allows you to dabble at 1440p to see what it's like. And on paper, you could argue that the 6600 is a cut down version of the XT that maybe didn't quite make the cut, with the same transistor count, same die size, and the only difference really being in the 4 less compute units, 4 less ray accelerators, and 256 less stream processors. You have to ask, is this a way of shifting focus to a cheaper product using the same materials? Well, only AMD will know that. I mean, differences aside, the 6600 and the XT both share 64 render output units each. They both have 32 meg of Infinity Cache, 8 gig of GDDR6, and both operate on PCI Express 4.0 x8. The memory bandwidth differs slightly, with 224 gigabytes per second compared to 256 on the XT, and the TDP is slightly lower at 132 watts, compared to the still relatively low 160 watts on the 6600 XT. So, specs aside, if AMD are positioning this from a price point that comes in as the cheapest GPU in the market, at least until Intel potentially come out with their first lower end GPU, can AMD compete in a market that is almost kind of a market that maybe NVIDIA have potentially even forgotten about? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's run them glorious benchmarks. So before we talk numbers, with today being the launch of this card, we have the XFX Swift 210, which comes in with reference figures in terms of the game clock and the boost clock. Now, from what I'm told, which at the time of filming, I've not really had it confirmed to me, but all 6600 non-XTs will feature the same figures and all be based off a reference spec, which in theory should actually make choosing a card a lot easier. Obviously, we can confirm this later if we need to and put it in the description below or the comments, but only having the one card, don't take this as gospel. Again, with the 6600, much like its bigger brother, the XT, there is no reference design card, but instead just a reference spec to work from, which is exactly what XFX have done here. Being honest, I actually really like what XFX have been doing in terms of their design, and dare I say it, it's one of the better looking cards on the market. In terms of its cooling performance, XFX have never been the best, never been bad. It's kind of middle of the road. It's not the hottest card in the world, but it is maybe slightly on the louder end of the scale with the other cards that we tested. Being a dual fan cooler, that is kind of expected though, and when up against MSI's Gaming X Trio cards, you're always going to lose in that department. And also you have to remember with the MSI Gaming X Trio cards, they're always going to tend to come in significantly more expensive too. So the all important question, is it worth the money? I mean, that's such a tricky one to answer in this day and age, and it all really depends on what the money actually is. At its SEP of $329 or $299 in the UK, it's hard to deny that it's cheap. But at the time of filming this, which is before it physically launches, without having a crystal ball, it's hard to see kind of what's going to happen with the market. The only thing that I can say is that at its rated SEP, $329, $299 in the UK, it is currently now the best value proposition for moving into the latest generation of PC gaming with all of the latest features. Like I mentioned, FSR and ray tracing, which is always going to get better as time goes on. More games come out, they adopt the technology and so forth. And it's also going to give you that ability to play the latest titles at 1080p on high settings. Now, another key point is that all of AMD's range, including the 6600, does have the ability, when paired with a Ryzen 5000 series processor, to enable smart access memory, which will of course give you a nice performance boost, much like we see with NVIDIA and resizable bar and whatever Intel are going to be bringing. Now, we wanted to set a level playing field, and that's why we test them all as is, with none of that enabled. So we're comparing apples to apples, especially when we're looking at comparing AMD versus NVIDIA. We try to kind of think how a consumer would. Now, the only sticking point really is price, as I mentioned. And if the price gets bumped up more towards RTX 3060 levels, which are currently, as I mentioned, through the roof, that's another question, as NVIDIA, they kind of do still have that upper hand in terms of the other technologies which aid performance, like ray tracing, DLSS. But what we did find is that, like we've seen with other AMD cards, they can compete. More so in the latest titles, with some small gains being had in the likes of Dirt 5 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But one interesting thing is that the smaller amount of memory on the 6600, when compared to NVIDIA's 3060, really is a stickler when it comes to anything above 1080p. And though I doubt anyone will be playing above 1080p when buying a card like this, maybe it goes to show that if you wanted to go slightly larger, whether it be to 1440 or even ultra wide, 2560 by 1080, the NVIDIA card may actually be the better card, just not at those crazy prices we're seeing right now. Now, one thing that is worth considering is that the 6600 XT launched with an SEP of $379 and is currently being sold at retailers in the UK from £470. So we know that the 6600 non-XT will come in cheaper than that, otherwise they just kind of cancel each other out. So with the 3060 selling at $550, the 6600 XT selling at $470, you could likely guess that the 6600 should, even with inflated pricing, come in around $420, which will still make it the best value proposition right now. I mean, it's really that simple. It comes down to maths. So should you buy it? If you can get it for the price it's meant to be, then yes. Stock, from what we're told, should be plentiful. Each card from every AIB should be basically the same, apart from the cooler. So whatever choice you make should give you figures similar to what you saw here today, unless you're going to enable things like smart access memory. Now, as with all the GPU videos we've made lately, it's so hard for us to judge and comment on things when the situation is still so messy and all over the place. I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments section below. Is the 6600 going to be on your Christmas list? Or Are NVIDIA just too powerful, even if $200 more over the price than they should be? Either way, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know exactly what to do, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.